Hello, everyone. Welcome. As people are still joining, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen and get us started. But please use the chat, say hello. We're so glad you're here. And also, please use the chat throughout if you have questions, comments, if you want to share examples of some of the work that you might be doing related to this. We'd love to see it. We are going to leave some time for questions at the end, though, as well. Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and get it kicked off here. Hi, everyone. My name is Lynn Walsh. I'm the Assistant Director at Trusting News. I'm going to talk more about what we do at Trusting News, but mainly what we are focused on is helping journalists build trust with their audience. We've been doing it since 2016, so 10 years. And primarily what we work on in our strategies are focused on engagement and listening and transparency. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how AI fits into that. A little bit more about myself. I'm the assistant director at Trusting News. Before joining Trusting News, I spent over 15 years in journalism, primarily as a local investigative reporter in the US. I also am a former national president of the Society of Professional Journalists, a former ethics chair for them, currently on their ethics committee. Also an adjunct professor, and I split time between San Diego and upstate New York. And then joining us today also is the researcher that we worked on for this project, Benjamin Toff. And Ben, I'll go ahead and have you say hello.
Hi, everyone. I'm Benjamin Toff. I'm the director of the Minnesota Journalism Center, as well as a professor at the Hubbard School of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of Minnesota. Um, However, I'm also on sabbatical at the moment. So I'm actually, rather than being in Minneapolis, I'm actually based in Washington, D.C. for the year, where I'm a visiting researcher at Pew Research Center. A lot of what I study is the public's relationship with news, news avoidance, trusted news, the changing information environment. Got connected with Joy and Lynn and Trusting News several years ago when I was leading a project at the Reuters Institute for Study of Journalism at Oxford, studying trusted news across the US, the UK, Brazil, and India, which is currently a book project that I'm hoping to get done while I'm on sabbatical this year. So yeah, thrilled to be here. Happy to talk more about the research we did together this year, which is sort of building on some work we did together last year.
Great. Thanks so much. And then in addition to Ben, two of my other colleagues at Trusting News are here, Molly Muchna and Joy Mayer. They are going to be in the chat sharing links and kind of chiming in and answering questions as we go along with this. So please feel free to, again, use that chat as we go along. So what we are about to share and this question that we've been trying to answer for the last 2 years at Trusting News. I told you a little bit about what we do at Trusting News. So we are a 501c3 journalism support organization. And what we are mainly focused on is helping journalists build trust. And I mentioned that those main two buckets that fits into are or how journalists can do this is through engagement and listening and then transparency. Well, we know that journalists are going to use AI. 2 years ago, that was happening. We're seeing even more now, 2 years later, that more newsrooms are leaning into the tools and ways that AI can help the content, but also help the content that we're sharing with the communities become better. And personally, I believe there are lots of good reasons for journalists to use AI in ways that they can do it ethically and responsibly. So this question was, we know trust in news is low. We also know that people's feelings about AI, when you look kind of broadly at other data, people don't have necessarily great feelings about AI. They might be worried about it. They might not understand it. They might be concerned about its impact on the environment, its impact on jobs, its impact on the economy, its impact on mis and disinformation and the information ecosystem, right? So trust in journalism is low. Now journalists are using a tool that people don't have great feelings about. We didn't want to see that use of AI lead to more distrust in news and journalism. And so we set out to kind of answer this question of how can journalists build trust, maybe just not lose trust while still using AI. So this has been, as Ben kind of hinted at, something that we've been working at and trying to study for the last 2 years. And so it all started with an audience listening cohort. And so a lot of our work at Trusting News, we come up with, we look at a problem that the industry is facing, that newsroom journalists are facing. We come up with possible solutions or try to find a solution. We do that by recruiting newsrooms to test a solution or to ask their audience what possible solutions might be. And so when it came to AI, that's exactly what we did. We recruited newsrooms to ask their audience about their feelings about AI in general, their feelings about AI and its use in news, and then what do they expect when journalists use AI? So that is what kicked us off. From that survey, we basically learned that people want transparency. They want disclosures. And we also learned that people were interested in more AI literacy. And so the reason that we have started trying to answer this whole question, again, how can journalists build trust or maybe just not lose trust while using AI? We did start with that foundational principle of our work at Trusting News, that journalists make more informed decisions about what it means to serve the public if they understand the people they aim to serve. So that's why 2 years ago, those journalists, it started with a survey. Let's ask our audience, how do you feel about us using AI? What do you expect when we do? And so I'm going to briefly go over what we learned from that previous work because it directly ties to why we decided to have journalists in newsrooms share AI literacy content. And so when those newsrooms ask their audience those questions about their feelings about AI, their feelings about their comfort level with different AI use cases in newsrooms, and then their expectations. When journalists use AI, what does the public want? What we learned, first and foremost, people want journalists to disclose their use of AI. They want to know that there are guardrails in place that are monitoring and regulating how they are using these tools, and that they are making sure still that journalists can still make sure that even though they're using these AI tools, that the content is ethical and accurate. And people just are saying, tell us. If you used AI in a story, let us know. So in that first survey 2 years ago, we had over 6,000 respondents, and 94% of them said, we want disclosure. We used a very, very similar survey last fall with the local media association. We asked that same question, and that percentage went up to 98%. So we're seeing that still 2 years later, people want transparency. So when we asked about that transparency, we also dug a little deeper into what does that mean? When do you want transparency? What kind of information do you want to know? And what we did is, based on what the public told us, we have this AI use disclosure template that we developed based on that feedback from the public. And what we did is, in this template, it basically answers every question that the news consumers said that they wanted answered. So they wanted to know what journalists did with their use of AI. What kind of tool did you use? And what did it help you do? When you were using the tool, did you make sure to fact check? Was there a human involved? Those are questions people are very concerned about, and they want a human involved, and they want to make sure you still fact check. And then also, they want to know, why did you use it? And so explaining that it allowed you to do more, go more in depth, provide content, and then linking to basically a policy or anything that says that you have those guardrails in place. So this is stuff that the public said they wanted. We put it into a template, and then in our kind of circle of learning and experimentation, we wanted to see, okay, the public says they want this. What happens when journalists give them this? So we recruited more newsrooms to use this template, attach it to stories, and see how news consumers responded. What we saw is that seeing the disclosure, so seeing a disclosure like this on a story, on the top, bottom, middle of a story where AI was used, did generally lead to a decrease in trust in that specific news story. We believe, though, that this reaction to learning that AI was used tended to be stronger than any reassurance provided by detailed disclosure language. So personally, I was a little disappointed by this. People said they wanted transparency. We give it to them. Still, they're not satisfied. And so what we are wondering is, could this AI literacy be the missing piece? Why we're wondering that is because in that first survey, when we asked people what their expectations around AI use by journalists, what those expectations were, they said transparency, they said disclosures. They also said that they would welcome education about how AI works, what it is, how it's being used around them, and they would welcome that education and literacy from journalists. 80% of those 6,000 survey respondents said that. So this has brought us, we saw that people wanted transparency. We give it to them. It led to some decrease in trust. Could this AI literacy kind of help be a missing piece to help people better understand the technology that we're using and make them feel more comfortable with our use of it? So that's what landed us here with this cohort. So what we did is we recruited more newsrooms who were willing to share AI literacy content with their communities and invite their communities to give feedback on that content that they saw, because we wanted to know, did people learn something? Did they like the content? Most importantly, did seeing the content impact their level of trust with the news organization who shared it? And so when we're talking about AI literacy content and how we did this, I worked to create the AI literacy content. This content was primarily social cards that we created using Canva. So these were cards where you're on Instagram, and I'm going to show you a couple examples, but you slide through, and they covered things like, how does AI work? What can AI do? What can't it do? What would be some good ways that someone in the community could use AI? What would be some ways that probably not a good use case for AI right now? We also had some more kind of consumer protection type of stories and cards where we had cards talking about how not to get scammed by AI, how to protect your family and friends from AI, and how to spot AI. What you'll notice is that this AI literacy content was primarily not about how the newsroom was using AI. The point here was to educate and provide educational content to help people more generally understand AI in general, not necessarily how it was used in the newsroom. And again, why we did that is because that's something that the public said they wanted, and they would welcome that from journalists. So at Trusting News, we created the content. We had those social cards. We also had social video scripts, so scripts that newsrooms could turn into social videos. And we had an AI literacy quiz. The newsrooms were able to adapt the content to make any changes they wanted. They shared it with their audience, and then they invited their audience members to take a survey and give feedback. And I want to just show a couple examples of what this content looks like, and then Ben's going to describe how the surveys worked. So one of the newsrooms that participated was Facts Matter. They're based in Nigeria. This is an example of what the AI, the social cards, looked like when shared to Instagram. So kind of something you're probably very, very familiar with, a carousel of images, but these were designed in Canva and then had information in this case about how you can protect family and friends from AI dangers. And then I am going to click and show an example of one video here.
Buzzword and topic at the moment, artificial intelligence. But more importantly, knowing how to spot AI can help protect you against misinformation and scams. For text and written content, AI writing can often sound polished but generic. It's going to use an overly formal tone, it's going to be vague and lack personal details. There will also be kind of a repetitive structure going on. For images, you're going to want to zoom in. AI can struggle with the fine details. Think about warped fingers or warped logos. It can also get background text wrong. And for humans, it can sometimes make their skin weirdly smooth. For video, you're going to want to watch for short clips. Maybe when the person is speaking, their mouth isn't exactly aligned with the audio. You're also going to want to look for stiff movements, lighting inconsistencies, or objects that warp, move, or disappear completely. For audio, there might...
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. That gives you an idea of what this content looked like. So Basically, what we had newsrooms do is we had them, I created social scripts, and they then adapted them to their own style. So in this KXAN example, we had they basically use that kind of very simple influencer style kind of feedback where it's just the reporter talking, not much production level. Other newsrooms like Metroland Media did work to add graphics to those videos, but again, use that same kind of script of trying to show people how to spot AI content, how not to get scammed. And then we also had newsrooms that shared this content to LinkedIn, to Nextdoor, and we had an AI literacy quiz. The other thing I will say is that we had newsrooms that shared this with English-speaking audiences and then Spanish-speaking audiences. So we had social cards and video scripts that were in both English and Spanish. And so, Ben, do you want to describe and talk about how we set up the surveys to get the feedback once they saw the content?
Yeah, so we wanted to understand how audiences were responding to this content, and we took sort of two different approaches to collecting data about it. One was to share a survey with audiences of the newsrooms that are part of the cohort. They had different ways in which they distribute those surveys because so much of this content was on social media. And as any of you know who use Instagram or TikTok, it's very hard to actually share a link to anything on those platforms. And so there were other strategies that employed, I think, to try to reach their audiences through newsletters or through other platforms. We managed to collect 275 responses from their audiences. And again, this is where people had just seen some example of this news literacy, AI literacy content. And there are some questions about their reaction to it, which will show you those responses in a minute. Now, if any of you have ever done surveys of your audiences, you know you don't get exactly a representative sample of your audience. You get a very specific subset of your audience, people who are either angry enough to respond to a survey or love you so much that they're going to do anything you want. And so you get this sort of mix of people that just it's hard to know how to interpret. So in addition to that cohort audience set of respondents, we also collected survey results from a more general public population using a platform called Prolific. Prolific is a service that a lot of social science researchers use. People sign up, anybody can sign up on Prolific to participate in tasks, many of which are surveys, but not just surveys. And what's nice about it is everyone is paid a small amount of money for completing these tasks, usually 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the task. I would say it's quasi-representative. It's still not a representative sample of the public, but there are quotas attached to certain demographic groups like age, race, gender, party identification in some cases. So you can get something that approximates the general public more broadly. But this is a sample of people who are online who've signed up to use this service. So keep that in mind as a caveat as well, as we'll show you in a minute. There are some differences in terms of that population from the public as a whole, but allowed us to sort of triangulate on how the public might respond to this kind of AI literacy content, including those who may be less likely to be following any one of these individual outlets.
Yeah, and then for that survey, what we did is because with the cohort survey, or the people who responded to the newsrooms, they were seeing a variety of content. This could have been one of those videos I showed you. This could have been a post on LinkedIn. This could have been a social card on Instagram, and they could have covered a range of topics. For the participants who participated in Prolific, we selected 3 of those examples that were all social cards. And then they were randomly shown one of those pieces of sample content. So what you will see in these results is that audience responding to seeing one example of one of the social cards that we created for the newsrooms to use.
Yes, and I'll just add one other thing I add too is, the difference between these two different samples. The general public sample, these are Whereas the other survey, we could ask specifically about the organization that had shared that content. For the general public, we asked about the organization who shared the content, but there isn't a specific organization that's tied to it. And so people's reactions in the general public survey is to an organization that's sharing these AI literacy examples, which makes it a little bit different in terms of thinking about how to compare it.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll talk and glad to answer more questions as we go along. But now let's get to what we learned. So newsrooms share the content and or people are seeing the content on Prolific. Again, they're seeing one of a sample of 3 AI literacy content. This is social cards, social videos aimed at trying to help people better understand AI more generally, not necessarily its use in the newsroom. What we wanted to find out is, again, people told us that they want AI literacy, AI education. They said they welcome that from journalists. So if journalists give it to them, one, did people learn anything? And then, what did they think about it? Did they find it useful, relevant? Did they like it? Did they want to see more of it? So that was kind of one area of questions we were interested in. But the other question we were really, really interested in is, how did this impact someone's trust in the news organization that shared that content? So they're saying, help me better understand AI. The newsroom's helping them better understand AI. Does that impact their trust in the news organization? And so this first question, was the AI literacy content useful and relevant? We asked different questions to both groups. And so as I go through this research, as Ben and I go through the research, we will be showing you both how the cohort newsrooms, that news consumers responded, so that's that smaller group, and that what we're calling the public, more of the general public survey, that's that Prolific, how both audiences responded, and in some cases pointing out some differences. But first area of questions, was the content useful, relevant? What did they generally think of it? And did they learn anything? And what we found is that people did generally find the content very useful. We saw that both with the cohort news consumers and with that general public, that Prolific survey, when they were asked how useful did they find the information that they just saw, so the AI literacy content, 77% of the newsroom cohort audience said that they found it very or somewhat useful, and you had 93% of that general public audience say that they found it useful. The same goes for how relevant they found the information. Most people did say that they found it very or somewhat relevant for both groups, both the cohort audience and the general public. I also want to point out that almost 90% of the respondents in the general public survey said that they were likely to use the information that they saw, so that they saw in that AI literacy content, in their daily life, with 61% saying that they were extremely or very likely to. So people found it useful, people found it relevant, and people said they would be interested in seeing more AI literacy content like this. We saw from the cohort audience, saw 60% of people say that yes, definitely, they would be interested in seeing more of this. And 56% of the people from the general public survey said yes, definitely, we would be interested in seeing more content like this. Then we get to that question of, did people learn something from the AI literacy content? And so here it becomes a little more, we see some differences between the two audiences. So first, 70% of the newsroom cohort respondents, remember these are the actual news consumers who are seeing the newsroom content from the specific news organization that they follow, said that they learned a lot or a little about AI from the content. So 70% of those 275 people are saying, yes, we did learn a lot or a little about AI from the content. When you look at if the people from the general public sample, that Prolific sample, who again, aren't necessarily, they're not seeing it from a specific newsroom that they follow, but they know that this is coming from a newsroom and they're reacting to one piece of content. 59% of them said that most of the information was a review of what they already knew. 30% said that most information was new with some helpful review. So we saw that the difference there, the cohort respondents are saying mostly that they learned a lot or a little, versus that general public sample is people in that sample were saying that most of the information was a review of something they already knew. And in some cases, 30%, there was some new information. Now, why we think we see some of these differences, and Ben hinted at this a little bit, is a couple differences in just who responded and who is represented in those different audience samples. So the newsroom cohort respondents skewed older. Also, they were not using AI as often as the general public survey. So 28% of those represented in that newsroom cohort survey sample used AI weekly or more, while 28%, an equal number, had never used AI. So you have people, about a third using it often, a third never using it, versus in that general public survey, 75% said that they used AI weekly or more, with 41% using AI daily. So that difference in AI use could make sense as to why maybe they didn't learn as much. What's interesting, though, is even though you have this group of people who you have from the newsroom cohort survey sample, respondents that tend to skew older, not using AI as much, and then the general public survey where they're using AI a lot more, we saw that in both cases when we asked people after viewing the content, do you still have questions about AI after viewing it? And what we saw is that most respondents said they had about the same number of questions about AI from prior to viewing it and then after viewing it. What we think is going on here when you look at that question of did people learn something is that this really does just underscore the complexity and how much there is to really understand about AI, and that people are having trouble or maybe aren't finding as much information about all the elements of AI as we either may think or they may think, right? That it's a complex subject matter. There's lots of different things when it comes to aspects to learn about it. So complex subject matter, and I think this also shows that there's still a continued need for AI literacy efforts, whether that's from newsrooms or elsewhere, because even people who are using AI a lot still found the content useful and helpful and relevant, and are saying, well, I still kind of had about the same number of questions. This also, just to kind of point out, to reiterate what I just said, is, even if the information was familiar, the audience still found it useful and relevant and said that they wanted more of this, and would return to the news organization for more information about AI. And I think what this also shows is that audiences are saying that even if this isn't something brand new, I still appreciate the way it was packaged, organized, verified, the way context was provided, and that it came from kind of a trusted source when it comes to information about AI. So now we get to the big question. Did AI literacy content build trust in the news org? And what we found is that the answer is yes. People were more likely to say that they had increased trust in the news organization after viewing the AI literacy content. We had basically close to half of the respondents in the public survey said that they were either much more trusting or somewhat more trusting in the news organization after viewing the AI literacy content. Now, I just want to point out that I'm very excited to see this as an organization that works to build trust here in Newsroom, sharing something that people said they wanted. We give it to them, and they're saying that yes, after seeing this, it's something that did increase trust for almost half. But the other thing is we see this as an opportunity, because respondents in that general public survey, and for most of the newsroom cohort too, like that's only one piece of content before answering these questions. So if that happened after a brief interaction, we are very curious, what happens if people are seeing it multiple times? Does that increase trust even more for a greater number of people, or increase trust more? So if it doesn't just go from like somewhat more trusting, maybe it goes to much more trusting after seeing several pieces of content like this, or a series of content like this, or regular content like this. So that was from the general public survey. This is another difference that we saw when it comes to the cohort audience. So with the cohort audience, we saw that seeing the content mostly did not change their view toward the news organization. More people still did say that it increased their trust than decreased it, but for most, 60%, 59%, it was about the same. So those actual news consumers responding to content that they saw from a newsroom that they follow, for most of them, they are saying that after seeing that AI literacy content, their trust in the news organization stayed about the same. Now, one reason we think this could be is that we also, as part of that survey, asked them about their general trust in the news organization where this content came from. And this was a very trusting group of individuals. You had over 50% saying that they either trust somewhat or trust completely in the news organization already. So it could just be that because they were already so trusting, it might not have moved the needle as much. Another way that we looked at this question of did it build trust? So we asked just flat out, did this build trust between you and the news organization that you just saw this content from? But we also asked a couple questions, around basically, would you turn to this news organization again for information in general and for information about AI? Why we asked that question is because it's a way to look at trust in a way of, is someone going to find you credible enough to come to you again? Is someone finding you reliable enough to come to you again? Is someone finding you consistent enough to come to you again? And so those are elements of trust that also can help newsrooms determine how well they're serving their audience. And so what we found, and we asked this to the general public survey respondents, is that most people said they were likely to turn to the news organization behind that AI literacy content for more information, specifically information about AI, but also information in general. So I'm going to pass it to Ben because he's going to talk about, we had questions where we asked them specifically about their reactions to the AI literacy content, but we also asked more general questions just about how often they use AI, which you saw some of that, and also more generally about like, just do they trust in news content, generally speaking? And he's going to talk about some of the differences we saw about people with low trust in news, who reported having low trust in news, and people who reported having more trust in news, and how they responded to this content.
Thanks, Lynn. Yeah, so one of the advantages of having the 2,000 respondents on Prolific is that we can carve up the sample by these different subgroups. And so although it is a little bit more of an artificial kind of environment because it's not, they don't already have a relationship with a specific news organization they're responding to, we can at least look at these differences within the sample. So when we ask people, whether they would be more or less trusting towards the organization that had provided this content. And we break it down by how trusting they were towards news in general. We've subdivided here into those who somewhat or completely trust news in general versus those who said they neither trusted nor did not trust, or those who did not trust news in general. You can see this pattern here where you do have the most increase in trust as a result of seeing this AI literacy content among those who are already trusting towards news. But you also see even those who do not trust news in general, they are also more likely to say that they feel more trusting towards the organization as a result of seeing this content. And so, it tells us something here that even among those who are less likely to be trusting towards news in general, that this kind of content did seem to resonate with this audience as well. not as much as those who are trusting in general, but still somewhat reassuring to see that here. Similarly, when we looked at the percent who said that after seeing this content, whether they'd be more or less likely to turn to this organization for more information on this topic or more information in general, by levels of trust in news, you see a kind of similar pattern here where, yes, those who are most trusting towards news in general, they're the by 56, 62% more likely to turn to that organization. For news on this topic or news in general. But even among those who don't trust news at all, or somewhat not trusting of news, you do see, compared to those who said they were less likely to turn to that organization, a pretty sizable difference there. So still the not nearly as much as those who are trusting, but you do see still, at least relative to more likely versus less likely, you still see a pretty big gap there. So that again, reassuring that this pattern seems to hold even for those who are less trusting towards news in general. And then again, just looking at the percentage that they turned to this organization for more information on the topic of AI. The other thing we looked at, as Lynn mentioned at the beginning, we showed 3 different examples of AI literacy content in this prolific version of the survey. And so we could look at differences across those 3 because people were randomly assigned to one of these 3 examples. And so we could look at whether there were differences between the types of content and whether people said they'd be more likely to turn to this organization for information on the topic of AI. And we did see, at least for these first 2, slightly higher levels saying that they'd be more likely to turn to this organization versus the last example, which was simply about what AI can and can't do. Whereas the first 2 about how to spot AI content and how to protect family and friends from AI dangers, I think both of those examples sort of get at news you can use, so to speak. I mean, they're sort of more applied, not just basic understanding of what the models are doing and what they can't do. And so that seemed to sort of maybe be part of what's going on here in terms of slightly higher levels responding positively to it, that people felt like they were sort of getting more use out of those topics versus the third one.
Thank you, Ben. And then I have just one other piece of content here, and then we're going to get to questions and some resources to help you do this. We also talked about how we asked people generally, do you trust in news, to kind of be able to do those comparisons to see like how people with low trust, as Ben just went over, and people with high trust in news responded to this content. We also, though, were curious if people's frequency of AI use mattered and if people's knowledge of AI impacted results. And so one thing we also were able to do is Ben was able to gather questions to basically to ask people about how AI works. Based on how they answered those questions, the number that they got correct, we were grouping them into 3 groups: people with high AI knowledge, medium AI knowledge, and low AI knowledge. And so what we found is that 95% of respondents who said that they use AI daily said that rated the content as useful or very useful. We also found that a very similar percentage, 92% of respondents who said that they use AI less than once a week, also rated the content as somewhat or very useful. So again, you have groups of people on different edges of the spectrum use AI a lot and who don't use AI as often. And they're both saying overwhelmingly that they found the content somewhat or very useful. And we found a very similar finding when it came to AI knowledge. So 93% of those respondents that had high AI knowledge rated the content as somewhat or very useful. 89% of those respondents with low AI knowledge rated the content somewhat or very useful. So overall, we are seeing that this content really resonated with people, a lot of different people, whether they use AI a lot, use AI a little, have a lot of knowledge about AI, don't have a lot of knowledge about AI, and are either already trusting in news or not trusting in news. And so we see that as just a really good reason to do more of this. So I'm going to very briefly go over, like, as we've been looking at this for 2 years, If a journalist newsroom wants to know, I'm going to use AI. I'm going to do it responsibly, ethically. We've thought about that. I want to make sure that my audience doesn't lose trust in our content or stops turning to us when they find out that we use AI. So what should we do? Well, our recommendations at Trusting News still are the top two. Listen and engage with your audience about your use of AI. Ask them questions, ask for feedback. That's a must. We also still believe that disclosure is essential. Please get a public-facing AI use policy out there and use those AI use disclosures on stories. In that transparency, it's essential to emphasize your commitment to accuracy and ethics. How are you still making sure that the content is accurate and ethical? And anytime, anything you can do to emphasize the human elements of journalism, but also that a human was involved. We also, though, think that those two things are probably not enough. And we do really think that newsrooms should be investing in putting AI literacy as part of our work. First and foremost, I think it is a basic kind of public service journalism that we can provide, but also based on these results, I think it's helping people in ways that no one else is kind of helping them at this moment, and that because we're helping them, they're seeing us as a trusted source for information, and maybe will even come back to us. And so if you want help doing this, we have a brand new trust kit. At Trusting News, we try to take our learnings and make them as actionable as possible. So we have a new trust kit dedicated to how you can create and share AI literacy content. In the trust kit, you will find a survey that you can copy, edit, and ask the same questions that the newsrooms that participate in our cohort ask to learn more about what specifically does your audience want to know about AI. This can be really helpful because there's lots of different things you can focus on, but maybe you get a message that they really are concerned about the environment, or they want to know how to protect their family and friends or themselves from AI scams, right? So that survey can kind of help you narrow it down as you all have limited resources and are trying to figure out how to fit this into your workflow. The other thing that we have is those same social cards that the newsroom shared. They're available to you. We are making them public. You click on the link and you can customize them with your own brand colors, change the graphics, do whatever you want, but they are there for you to share. I also have made those social video scripts. So for almost all of the social card templates, there is sample language for a social video, that example that you saw from KXAN. Again, you can edit it, you can change it, or you can use it as is and have a reporter do a simple video on TikTok. You can add graphics to it if you want. And then in addition, we did have an engagement tool that the newsrooms use, which was an AI literacy quiz. Basically, come learn and sharing out to the public and saying, how much do you know about AI? And so if you want to duplicate that effort, those questions to the quiz and the answers are there as well. In addition, we also worked with 4 newsrooms on hosting AI literacy events. We saw that the newsrooms that hosted those events that focused on how AI works, we did see that those did build trust with their audience. So if you want to learn more about what they did, and we have some sample agendas there so you can host your own events, and also some sample survey questions to help you measure how people felt about AI in your newsroom before the event and after the event. And then because AI literacy is not the full part of the picture when it comes to building trust with AI, we do also still have the AI Trust Kit that we have shared over the last year and a half that has those elements of how to talk more broadly to your audience and find out what your audience thinks about AI and your newsroom's use of AI, their expectations. What do they expect when you use AI? What are they comfortable with? And then really importantly is we have tools to help you be transparent and disclose your use of AI. A worksheet to help you create an AI use policy. We have one both in English and Spanish. That Mad Lib style fill in the blank template is there. A worksheet to help you do that. Lots of newsroom examples. And then we are going to be going more in depth over the next couple months, sharing more newsroom case studies from this work, and some updates on some of the newsrooms who have been doing some of the transparency work. And so if you want to stay up to date with that, we have our weekly Trust Tip newsletter. And then before I take questions, I just want to give a thank you to the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. They have funded this work and made this work possible, and we're really grateful for that. And then also to all the newsrooms who have participated over the 2 years. This really has been work that has been building as we continue to learn. And so we had the newsrooms that first participated in that first survey, newsrooms that participated in the transparency disclosures. We had the newsrooms that I showed you in the beginning that participated in this AI literacy, and then some of the newsrooms that participated in some of those AI literacy events. So I'm going to stop sharing and basically open it up for questions for the next 12 minutes here. And I don't know, Molly or Joy, if you saw any that jumped out that we want to start with, let me know. Otherwise, we can have people put in the chat and unmute themselves.
Yeah, I don't think there's any outstanding questions, but like Lynn said, please feel free to stick those in the chat or just go ahead and unmute.
Hey, I have a question. My name is Luke. I'm from KHQ.
Hi, Luke.
Hi. So is your suggestion to, let's say we use an AI program that takes, broadcast copy and changes it into web copy. Is your thought on the subject that not only should we have a note in the story itself saying, AI was used to, reformulate this, but we should also provide a link to an AI literacy page in which our policy is laid out?
Yes. Okay. So what you're describing has become, from talking to broadcast newsrooms, like a pretty common practice, actually, where they're using AI tools to turn that broadcast script into a web version of a script. I definitely think that the disclosure on the web story is something that I would include. My recommendation as far as linking to an AI use policy. So that recommendation comes from the research that we did last year, and Ben worked on that as well. What we saw is that we did see that when the disclosure included a link to an AI use policy, people did tend to respond to that disclosure better than if the link was not there. And so that is something that we actually ended up updating that disclosure template to say that, yes, we do believe that if you're writing that disclosure, include something that says, learn more about our AI use here, and linking to that. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, it does.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Appreciate it. And in general, this is going to sound like a loaded question, and I don't mean it to, but your research has shown that, let's just say that we're using AI, but we just don't talk about it. We just don't bring it up. It just never, if somebody asks us about it, sure, we'll tell them, but it's better to confront it head on, you would say, than to not hide it, but just not discuss it at all.
Yes, I definitely would. And Ben, I'd love if you also chime in on this. I mean, I definitely think that is the best thing we can do, even though we saw, like with that last research, that decrease in trust. The reason I say that, and Ben, if you want to talk to anything in the research that points that way, but I think for me, the reason I say that is I think, one, ethically, journalistically, I think it's the right thing to do. Two, though, when newsrooms have not disclosed, we have seen examples of that, right? It tends to blow up in their face and not be very good for them. And I think that is like worse than that slight decrease that we saw. I don't know, Ben, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's when in some of the work I've done this, we've referred to it as the dilemma for AI disclosure, because it is clear that audience both demand disclosure and transparency. They want to know, even on use cases that I think many of us would think would be pretty, low risk in terms of the threat to the accuracy of the information or what have you. But audiences really say they want to know, and however, in experiments, when you show people that disclosure versus not on the same piece of content, they're less likely to trust it. And a lot of what's driving that sort of gap in trust is people who see any association with AI in a negative light, and they think, And many of these people are the people who are most interested and engaged with news. They tend to be older. They tend to be less likely to be using AI themselves, but some of them just have concerns about the technology, intellectual property, its impact on the environment, its impact on the economy, like lots of things that are on people's heads around AI. And so they see any use of it, no matter sort of how responsible you think you are in terms of how you're doing it, is as a negative. And so they will respond negatively to that disclosure. But like Lynn said, I think it's when organizations are using it and then people find out later when something goes wrong that they really penalize your organization for not disclosing it. And I think that's where, if you think about trust as a relationship you're building with your audience, and your audience is very clear that that's what they want, I think it behooves you to sort of take that seriously.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. And Frank, hi, Frank. Do you want to go? I see your hand up.
Hi, Lynn,
Hi.
and Ben. Thank you. This is great. Uh, it was such a hurtful thing to think that doing good journalism and being transparent about our AI use would wind up being used against us. So I love that you keep pushing forward, and the premise that educating people about AI broadly also increases trust for our content, right? I wanted to go back something early on that maybe I misunderstood. So if you could unpack the piece where like how interesting and valuable did people find the content? And it looked like the news cohort rated the material more valuable and interesting, and the broader audience found the AI content a little lower in terms of I learned something new and it was valuable. And I feel like everything that happens after that is downstream of, is this content compelling to audiences? And so is there anything to learn around like what would it take to make AI reporting more compelling for our audiences so that all those virtuous benefits later would be stronger? Or maybe I misunderstood that piece of the research.
No, yeah, that's right. Ben, did you want to answer the question just about the differences in the like of the audiences or?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main difference is just that what we were calling the general public survey, the prolific
Yeah.
sample, these are people who are much more digitally literate. They're much more likely to be using AI themselves. And so I think that's where you did see their response to this content. Fewer of them saw it as new information. And so
Yeah.
they're sort of looking for a little bit more detail, probably more depth to AI literacy content. Despite that, they were just as, if not more, positive in terms of the responses of how it resonated with them. That may be because they're that much more interested in AI, and so they had a positive response for that reason, even though they already know a lot more. Um, but I think that was really the main difference if you think about the two samples that we were testing this on. But I think more generally, I would say the starting point is your specific audience and where they are in terms of their knowledge and understanding of AI, but also the kinds of fears or concerns they might have, which may be specific to any given place, whether it's about data centers in the environment or jobs in the industries in that community. I mean, there's a lot of concern and anxiety and emotions that people have about this technology, and that was something that came through to us in our last round of research. And I think if you think about the AI literacy content as not just being sort of about AI literacy in general, but about how to make sense of the impact of this technology on the things and the issues and the topics that matter to your audience. I think that's where the value of it becomes that much clearer.
Yeah, and I would add to that. So I think to me, I was actually surprised. You know, you have the general audience, that prolific audience, saying, you know, that they didn't learn as much as the cohort audience. And I think probably that is because they were much more heavy AI users than the other than the cohort audience. But they still are overwhelmingly, you know, saying, yes, we found it useful. Yes, it's relevant. I mean, almost 90% of them said they were likely to use this information in daily life. So like still saying like, we want more of it. We found it relevant. We found it useful, and we're going to use it in our daily life. Like, I don't know how often news content actually, like, that would be interesting to ask. How often do people see news content and they're like, we're going to use it in our daily life? We probably think the percentage is high, but might be surprised that it's not. The other thing I guess I would say, Frank, is that the content that we shared, it very much was hitting on, and this also, Laura, kind of answers a little bit of your question as far as like the struggle to cover AI literacy when AI is changing so often. We tried to bake, like when I was creating the content and thinking of questions to answer, we really tried to focus on things that had a little bit of a longer lifespan. So it's, what is AI? How does AI work? And focusing on LLMs. And like, yes, that could change and will change, and like the small details of it change, but generally the learning, how it gathers information, like that hasn't that much. And so when you base it and base like the content on some of those very foundational ones, we have a series of cards on, is AI new? Just this idea of like kind of a history of where AI came from. Like that history definitely is not going to change, So some of this content, because we designed it that way, can be evergreen, I think, for a period of time and is designed that way to be shared. I also think it is kind of foundational for people to be able to engage with your story about a data center, or for your ability to have impact sharing that story about a data center. If you don't know what your audience understands or cares about when you're covering some of these other complicated issues, I think it's difficult to tell a complicated story like that without adding some of these elements in. And so I also think that this work shows that as we tell some of the more complicated AI stories, I really hope that newsrooms will invest in providing some definitions, providing some standing content that lets people have those on-ramps to engage with that content. And Laura, I hope that answers your question too. I saw it and I think you are right. I think it is hard for people to think about where to start with this, but we tried to start with some of those basics. And I see we have just like, oh, nope, top of the hour. So we are done. Please use our trust kit. I want to say thank you again to Ben. Thank you to McGovern, and thank you so much to the newsrooms that worked with us, because it's the only way we were able to see how audiences responded to this. If you want to duplicate this work, that trust kit is there, but please reach out. And also like get that public facing AI use policy out there. And if you need help with that, we have resources for that as well. So thank you, everyone.